You know why this announcement recording in progress has been placed on? It's only fairly recently. It's an automatic message. It's to warn people that they have to be careful what they say, because once something's recorded, it can be reported, you see, so people have to hold their hold their secrets back. So therefore you're under warning. Let me quickly just do a review of last week. Last week, the major topic was Shomea Ka'ona, the facility for a person to listen to somebody else make a bracha, recite something, even something like Hallel, and to be yotzer simply by listening to the other person, even not necessarily having to say Amen. Shomea Ka'ona makes them, fulfills their obligation, as long as they listen with kavanah, and the person making the bracha on their behalf does so with kavanah to be motzi them, then it all works. They can remain quiet. And that's a little bit of a chidush. And the Gemara proved it from some strange psukim to do with Shofan and Yoshiyahu HaMelech and Chilkiyahu HaKohen Gadol, etc., in Tanakh, which purported to show that a listener was as if that person had recited the passage himself, even though all he did was listen. And that was the makor. Although we say in terms of the londus behind it all, that it works because Kol Yisrael Arabim Zelozeh, that every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. So if one Jew hasn't yet discharged his obligation in a mitzvah, then another Jew can discharge it by reciting for him. That's part of the arevut. It's part of the mutual responsibility that one Jew bears for another Jew. It's a reflection of that arevut. We then looked at a Tosfot, and Tosfot gave us some further examples and insights. For example, Tosfos recommended that if a person is still saying his quiet Shemona Esrei and the Chazan has already reached the repetition to Kedusha, the Kadesh, or Naritzcha, then the person who is not completely through his own Amida should stop and just listen to the Chazan, and he will discharge his obligation for Kedusha, Shomea Ka'ona, simply by listening and remaining quiet. And then when Kedusha is over, when the recitation of the Chazan is over, then he can go back and continue his private Amida. It's better not to start in a situation like that in the first place, because it's better to say it for yourself. But if you are in that situation, you're a slow davener, then the best thing to do is to remain quiet while Kedusha is being said. Listen to the Chazan say Kedusha, and Shomea Ka'ona works for you. Simply listening is as if you had responded yourself. That was Tosfos. He also gave us a little bit of an extra tangential description of what Kaddish is all about. He explained that Kaddish is said in Aramaic. Why is it said in Aramaic, he asks. So he dismisses the idea it's because it's the Kaddish that the Yosem says for a year, that it's such a beautiful prayer that we don't want the angels to understand it. He brings that in from the Machzor Vitri, but he dismisses that. He says we have plenty of beautiful prayers in Hebrew as well. Why is Kaddish specifically in Aramaic? And the answer he gives is that the original Kaddish was the Kaddish Drabonon, which is recited by the Yosem, the orphan, the Avel, after learning, after there is a learning program, at the end of the learning program. And that's when a lot of simple people used to come to shul. And those people maybe didn't understand Hebrew, or weren't familiar with Hebrew in the same way as they were with their lingua franca. And at the time that Kaddish was composed, the lingua franca was Aramaic. And therefore, because it was the Kaddish recited by the ordinary man in the street, it was written, the formula was written in Aramaic. So it came down to the people. The irony, of course, today is that we understand Aramaic less than we understand Hebrew. So it's rather a contrary phenomenon for us. But the origins lie in the fact that the ordinary person at the time understood Aramaic, less understood Hebrew, and therefore Kaddish was phrased in Aramaic. That takes us through roughly the content that we learned last week. I'm going to commence today on Daf Lamed Tet Amud Aleph 39a. And I'm going to take it from, just count down from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines down. That's a very nice round number. Just 1 second. After the 2 dots, there are 2 dots there just after the second word on the 10th line down. And the Gemara begins, Omar Abaye, 10th line down. Abaye said the following. So first, let's just see what he said, and then we'll no doubt try and understand it. Lo shonu, the sages in the Mishnah only stated their halacha la'acharov, in relation to the one after it. Aval lefonov, but when it comes to the one before it, mitzvah levarech, it is a mitzvah to make the bracha. Here, Tosfos is taking us back to an extract in the Mishnah we learned a few weeks ago, which was one that we didn't focus on very much. We were talking there about Hallel. The Mishnah was largely about Hallel, about the shakings in Hallel, about the repetitions in Hallel, about the way in which somebody else could say Hallel for you if you couldn't say it yourself. And in that Mishnah, there was a passage that said that if in those places that there is a minhag to say a bracha at the end of a Hallel, which is what we do, we end it with Baruch Atah Hashem Melech Meholol Batishbachos, the end of Hallel, then that bracha should be recited if that's the minhag of a place. That's what the Mishnah said. So Abaye is just clarifying that. He said, as far as the bracha at the end is concerned, that depends upon minhag. Avol lefonov, we go back again to this Gemara we just started. The for bracha, the bracha we say before Hallel, which we all know, Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvah Tzavanu, Likro Es HaHallel, right at the beginning of a Hallel, mitzvah levarech. That is not a minhag, that's a mitzvah. Everyone should make that bracha. And indeed, we make that bracha, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Yom Tov, we make that bracha. That bracha is not toler on minhag, if you like. It is universally accepted mitzvah to make that bracha before the Hallel. And that's all Abaye is saying. The end bracha is dependent on whether there is a minhag to say that bracha. We have that minhag. The first bracha is not a minhag, but rather it is a requirement, it is a mitzvah. And how do you know that there is a mitzvah to say the bracha before Hallel? So he explains this from a general statement, or which is one that encompasses every mitzvah, not just Hallel. To Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvos kulon, every mitzvah that we do, mevorech alehen over la'asiyoson. One should precede the mitzvah with a bracha before carrying out the mitzvah. Prior to doing a mitzvah, we should introduce the mitzvah with a bracha. Now, the Gemara is going to busy itself for a moment on the words over la'asiyoson. Over la'asiyoson is a very strange expression. We have to understand it as if the word over was lifnei. Kol ha-mitzvos kulon mevorech lifnei asiyoson. You should always make a bracha before. But the word over could even mean the other way around, something that's already passed us by. Maybe Shmuel means every mitzvah you do, you should make a bracha after the mitzvah. How do we know over means lifnei? So the Gemara is going to bring a proof that it means lifnei. So let's see. Says the Gemara straight away, Umay mashma dahai over lishna akadumehu. When Shmuel made his statement that every mitzvah you need to make a bracha over la'asiyoson, and you assume it means that you need to make the bracha before the mitzvah, how do you know? What is mashma? What suggests to us that the word over in Shmuel's statement is a lishnat akadumi? Akadumi is from the Aramaic, from the similar word Hebrew of kodem, like lifnei. How can you be so certain this means that the mitzvah should have a bracha recited before it? Maybe it means after it, because the expression over is fairly unique when you're trying to talk about sequence in time. What was Shmuel doing, using a word that could have two meanings? So the Gemara now brings a proof, or brings three passages in Tanakh to prove that over means before, and it doesn't mean after or anything else. So let's see those proofs. They're not very important for us because it's universally accepted, and it was always traditionally accepted, that this principle means that a bracha needs to be made before you do a mitzvah. But the very fact that he employs this strange terminology of over instead of lifnei leaves it open to some sort of question. So the Gemara wants some textual proof that you can use the word over in place of lifnei. So here are the textual proofs. So now we're going to see that there are three examples. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. The first answer is given by Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. What do we mean by over? Dichsiv, there's a pasuk in Shmuel base which says Vayoratz Achimaatz Derech HaKikar. I mean, all this is historical from Shmuel and other Tanakh extracts. So this says Achimaatz ran Derech HaKikar through the direction of the plain, Vaya'avor es HaKushi, and he passed the Kushi. What does this mean? So if you look at Shmuel Beis, you'll see what the context is. Without context, it's a meaningless statement. The Pasuk is telling us, shortly after the death of Avshalom was being pursued, and he got trapped up in a tree somehow and he died. David HaMelech needed to be informed that Avshalom, his son, had been killed. And so the commander-in-chief sent a messenger to David HaMelech to tell him what had become of his son, to inform him of the news. And that person was a Kushi. A Kushi could mean an Ethiopian, he could have been a mercenary soldier, who knows? That's not so important. But this Achimaatz was so enthusiastic to bring the news to David, because Avshalom was a rebel, to bring this news to David HaMelech, that he managed to overtake the Kushi. And he got to David HaMelech and informed him in advance of the Kushi's arrival. So now we'll understand the verse. Vayoratz Achimaatz. Achimaatz ran ahead, Derech HaKikar, through the plain, Vaya'avor es HaKushi, and he passed in front of the Kushi, overtook him. So over here, the Gemara is suggesting Vaya'avor is the same as over. So Vaya'avor here has a sense of passing in front. Therefore, when Shmuel said you have to make a bracha, over la'asiyosom, it means in front of the mitzvah. In front meaning ahead. Okay, if you're happy with that proof, I'm pleased you're happy with the proof. So ya'avor means to get in front of, and therefore if you have to do a bracha next to a mitzvah, you should make that bracha in front of the mitzvah, which means before, in front temporally rather than just in front locationally. That's proof number one. Abaye is going to bring two other possible references whereby you can see the same idea, that vayavor or over has the connotation of before. So he says mehocha, I can bring you this pasuk, and this one is with Yaakov and Esav. So it's in Bereshit, so it's better. It's in the Chumash. We don't have to go to Shmuel. It says the who ova lifneim. It's referring to Yaakov when he is going to confront Esav after finally deciding that he will do so. And he brought his wives and his children with him. And it says the who ova lifneim. Yaakov passed in front of who? Rochel, Leah, and his children. That's what lifneim means. So again, you see, the ova lifneim means he wished to precede them. Obviously, he went in front of them because he wanted to be the first in line to meet Esav. He wasn't going to push his wife and children into the front line. He put himself in front as a shield. So ova lifneim, again, ova and lifneim shows again the connotation that ova means before, in front of, preceding, ahead of. That's what the posuk shows you. And if you're not happy with that proof, I'll bring you another proof. Says the Gemara, I can bring you another proof, Mehocha, from this posuk in Micha, right? One of the one of the prophets. Vaya'avor malkom lifnehem v'Hashem berosham. This could be referring to the Mashiach. It's difficult to know what the posuk's really referring to, but it says, and their king, I think it means here, will pass. This is like a nevuah, lifnehem, in front of them, in front of the people. V'Hashem berosham, and in front of all of them will be HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He will marshal his troops, if you like. He will pass in front of the king, and the king will be in front of the people when that great day comes. Again, it says Vayavor and Lifnehem. So Vayavor means to go in front, to precede. And therefore, we have three different proofs from Tanakh that over Ya'avor has a connotation of coming before. Therefore, it's been demonstrated that when Shmuel makes the statement that you need to make a bracha over la'asiyasam, over la'avor, to the doing of a mitzvah, it means in front of or before. It doesn't mean simultaneously, and it doesn't mean afterwards. It means before. You might think all this is pretty obvious, but it's interesting here how the Gemara labors the point. It knows what Shmuel means. Shmuel was an Amora. We're not talking about something in Tanakh, someone obscure. There's tracts and tracts in the Gemara about the sayings of Shmuel. He has frequent dialogues and arguments with Rav and with, Levi and many other of the early Amoraim. So why are we trying to parse his words as he be some sort of, prophet somewhere 800 years earlier on? But he uses an unusual expression. He's quoted for that expression. And therefore, Chazal, who came after him, the explanations we have here from Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak and from Abaye come from about a century later. They were later Amoraim than Shmuel. And so therefore they want to convince everybody that they understand and people can be satisfied with the meaning of Over La'asiyosan. We've got to know when to make the bracha. So we brought all this in the context of making a bracha before Hallel. Hallel is a mitzvah. And if Hallel is a mitzvah, then it needs a preceding bracha. Just like we make a bracha on taking the lulav and esrog and on shofar and on Megillah and on sukkah, etc. And Hallel also needs a mitzvah, and that mitzvah before is not going to be discretionary. It's not going to be toler on minhag because it's a halacha. And therefore, it needs to be said before, according to this principle of Shmuel. Okay, what I'm going to do now is look at the Tosafot again. I'm going to give you another Tosafos. We did one last week, and we're going to do another one because this one is actually very fundamental to some of the halachas we know relating to making a bracha on the lulav and esrog. Tosafos is going to go into detail on an important fundamental of halacha, which the Gemara is very, very much, you've got to be able to dig it out. So let me share my screen. Where's my screen? Okay, now you've got this Tosafos on your page as well. It's the second Tosafos on the left-hand column, Over La'asiyosan. But I've shown it to you here on the screen as well, in block text, block Hebrew, which you might prefer, and we can follow it together. And we'll go through this chilek over here, where he raises some very important points, some of which actually have correlations in other parts of halacha. So I think it's very interesting to go through it. Let's start from the beginning. He's commenting on the expression Over La'asiyosan, which we've just labored greatly ourselves. But he's not interested on the source of over and not over. He's talking here about the consequences of having to make a bracha before doing the mitzvah. What are the practical consequences? So he says, and he takes us to the real context that we're interested in, which is lulav and esrog. When you make a bracha on lulav and esrog, how should you do it? Now, everyone follows the Art Scroll instruction, but Art Scroll actually learns it from Tosafos, I have to say. It doesn't learn it from anywhere else. So let's read Tosafos here. Tosafos says, Mitam zeh, tzorich levorech halulav kodem shitlenu. Because you need to make a bracha in advance of the mitzvah, we need to make our bracha of Asher Kedishanu Tzosov Tzvonu on the lulav, we have to do so kodem shem yitlenu, before you actually take hold of the lulav. Because if you were to do so afterwards, mida agabayi nofik bay, the moment you pick up the lulav, you already yotze the mitzvah. Kita omrina b'so pirchin. What he's saying over here is the Gemara elsewhere says, what is the mitzvah of taking the lulav? Describe to me the actions necessary from the Torah. Well, the Torah only says something very simple. You should take for yourself. The moment I lift up the lulav, finished, done the mitzvah. Forget about all the shaking and shuckling and everything else. That's nice. The very fact I lift up the lulav, let's say the lulav and the esrog, let's not make a differential between them. I've already performed the mitzvah. So, therefore, I have to make a bracha before I actually pick up the lulav and the esrog. If I decide to pick up the lulav and esrog and now make the bracha, I'm making the bracha afterwards. And that's not allowed. So it's clear that I have to make the bracha before I actually pick up the lulav and esrog. So now Tosfos says, yeah, but that doesn't make sense either. Umihu lo nistaba klal. That doesn't make sense. How are we going to accomplish it? How can you make a bracha on the lulav before he picks it up while it's still on the table or in its box, or the esrog is still in its box? If you need to make the lulav before you take it, then presumably it's resting on the table. Can you really make a bracha just staring down at the lulav on the table? In Menachos, tefillin me'emo seimo borech aleihem, b'shas hanocha ad shas kasira. V'chol shosh ein ha-mitzvah mezumenes biyodo la'asos, lo mistaber klal levorech alav. What he's saying over here, and he's proved it from lulav and esrog, is that you cannot make a bracha on a mitzvah which isn't yet ready in your hand. In other words, you can't say, so to speak, point to something on the table and say, I'm going to take this, this will be my mitzvah, make a bracha now. It doesn't work. The Gemara says so in Menachos. And therefore, for example, if your tefillin are in your tefillin bag, you can't just point to the tefillin and say, you know, before I pick them up, I'm going to make a bracha. No, we know what we do. We take the bracha, we take the tefillin, we start to wind them. We actually put the batim on our hand or on our head, then we make a bracha. Because you shouldn't make a bracha while it's passively lying about. So we're left with a problem. How do we make a bracha on the lulav and esrog? In the case of the tefillin, that's fine. The bracha is to actually put them on. The mitzvah is to put them on. So we can already hold it in our hand. And then when we make a bracha, it's just prior to the actual winding. That works nicely. But if the moment you pick up the lulav and esrog, you've already performed the mitzvah, then you've already missed the boat for the bracha. So he's here in a catch-22. That's the catch-22 situation for lulav and esrog. So he suggests, now he's going to give you some suggestions, which you may have heard of before. V'shema misheyaskil litol lulav, kodum sheyitol ha'esrog, mevorech, v'haine over lahasiyoson shem akven zeh zeh. Here's suggestion number one. Tosfos is putting forward a number of suggestions as if he's there scratching his head. He says, I wonder whether this would work. What he's saying over here is, well, I'm making bracha on the lulav. Maybe he should take the lulav in his hand, because you cannot make a bracha before you've got it in your hand. We just said so. But I'll make the bracha just before I pick up the esrog. And since I'm already holding the lulav, I'm already, so to speak, licensed to make the bracha, but I'm not at this point fulfilling the mitzvah. I'm only fulfilling the mitzvah when I have the esrog as well, because you have to take arba minim, not just the lulav. Therefore, maybe all I need to do is pick up the lulav. It's in my hand now. At this point, I have the license, so to speak, to make a bracha, and that's fine, because even though I'm holding the lulav, the mitzvah hasn't started because the esrog is still on the table. Make my bracha, then pick up the esrog. And at the moment I put up the esrog, I fulfill the mitzvah. It's only at the point, because that's part 2. The part 1 of picking up the lulav hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah, but it's good enough for me to say the bracha. So I pick up the lulav, say the bracha, and then do part 2, pick up the esrog from the box. That simultaneously and immediately fulfills the mitzvah, and that means that the bracha I made was just prior to picking up the esrog, was just before fulfillment of the mitzvah. Right? 10 out of 10 for Tosfos. It's giving you a suggestion here, how you can navigate here between in your dilemma, this catch-22 situation, that you do half the mitzvah, so to speak, which is not considered to be a mitzvah, but you already put in your hand, so it's not like all lying around in a box. Pick it up, you can make a bracha, and then you made a bracha, it's still before fulfillment of the mitzvah, then pick up the esrog, and immediately pick up the esrog, you fulfill the mitzvah, and everything works absolutely beautifully. That's suggestion number 1 in Tosfos. So now Tosfos is going to give you another suggestion. And you may recognize this one. Inami la'achar shenotel shnehem. Maybe you should actually pick up both, not just one. Ela shehofech echad mehem. But he turns one of them upside down, or rather one of them is upside down at the point at which he takes it. Kida omrinan besov pirkin, as we say at the end of the perik. Kishahofchu de ein yotze b'mitzvahs ela derech gediloson. Kida darshin perik lulav arova. Elsewhere we see in this Gemara, elsewhere later on, that in order to perform the mitzvah, you have to have both of the all the species that you take the right way round. If you were to pick up an esrog upside down, with a pitum facing downwards, or if you like the lulav upside down even, it's a bit awkward to hold it upside down. But if you were to pick up any of the species the wrong way round, you are not yotzei the mitzvah. The mitzvah has to be derech gediloson. It has to be the way in which they grow, if you like. Anything else is not taking the species at all. It's just a clumsy trick. It's not like taking the mitzvah. So here's brilliant trick number 2 to get over this catch-22. Excuse me. You could take the lulav the right way round. That doesn't matter. You hold it by the handle or whatever it is, the packle, and that's fine, because at that point, as we said, you haven't got the esrog yet, so you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. You pick up the esrog as well, upside down with a pitum facing downwards. So now you're holding both minim. Very good time now to make your bracha. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah because the esrog is still upside down, but you're holding both of the chafetzim of mitzvah in your hand. That's sufficient for you now to say they are ready for you to make a mitzvah with. They're not lying around passively. Now you make your bracha. Having made the bracha, you invert the esrog so it now points the right way around, and you shake and shuffle, and that's fine. That's the performance of the mitzvah. You take the lulav the right way around, the esrog the wrong way around. At this point, no fulfillment of the mitzvah. But you take them in your hands, you can now make a bracha. You make the bracha, and having made the bracha, you turn the esrog the right way around. That completes the mitzvah. So you've made the bracha before you completed the mitzvah. You may recognize that that's the way we're recommended to do it nowadays. That's the way Art Scroll says. It is traditional, blah, 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 to hold the esrog, with a pitum downwards or whatever it is. This is option 2 in Tosfos, which is the one that is most commonly done today. Nearly everyone uses option 2. That's so that if you took the esrog the right way around, you'd already be, as we said before, yotze straight away, and you haven't yet said the bracha, and you want to say the bracha before you're yotze on the mitzvah. So you take the esrog upside down, make the bracha, turn it the other way around. Very ingenious. Everything's fine. You made the bracha while you've got the items in your hand. You don't fulfill the mitzvah until after you said the bracha. That's option number 2. Now, and he gives you a third option. Actually, let's go. So here's his third option. He says to him, you know what? I've got a third option. Maybe you should be allowed to take the lulav and esrog the right way round, in the way you would like to. Didn't we say a moment ago, hang on, the moment you take it the right way around, you're yotze the mitzvah. It's already too late to say to make the bracha. So here, Tosfos gives you a trick. Efsha, he should have a kavana, an intention, shelo lotzeitbo, not to perform a mitzvah acha bracha, until he's made the bracha. The Afal Domrin, the Sefer based in Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvahs einon tzrichin kavona mikol mokum bal karcha lo nofik. Says Tosfos something very, very interesting. And it takes us to a completely new, interesting tangent in kavanah and kavanah shel mitzvah. Tosfos says this to you. What is doing a mitzvah? Suppose I take a lulav and esrog, but I do so not because I want to fulfill the mitzvah. In fact, when I pick up the lulav and esrog, I have in my mind, no way do I want to perform the mitzvah in my handling of the lulav and esrog. I'm picking them up because I want to see whether they got blotches on, or for any other reason. Simply, I'm picking up the lulav and esrog. I have a negative kavanah, it's called. He calls it a negative kavanah. My kavanah is not, normally when I pick up a mitzvah, it's because I'd like to do the mitzvah. If I pick up the mitzvah with a negative kavanah, which is a state of mind, then I'm not yotze the mitzvah. This is very interesting. There is a principle that mitzvahs einon tzrichin kavanah. That if I do something, if you like, without really thinking about it, but it's a mitzvah, I do perform the mitzvah. It's a big kula because most of us don't have proper kavanah anyway. Otherwise, most of us wouldn't be out doing our mitzvahs. We put on our talis in the morning, whatever it is, and we're daydreaming. Are we yotze? Yes. Hey, did I really have in mind, I'm covering myself with a beged, and it's got tcheles, and tcheles is doma leyam, and leyam is doma leshamayim, the shamayim doma lekisai kavod. Do I have those kavanas? No. In fact, I may be putting on my talis and chatting to the person next to me, and yet I'm still yotze the mitzvah. The answer is life-saving principle. Mitzvahs einon tzrichin kavana. In most cases, forget about Kriya Shema, it could be an exception. Mitzvahs don't need kavana. If I perform the mitzvah, I perform the mitzvah. Now, of course, is it a good thing to perform a mitzvah without kavana? It's very, very second class. Rather, we should always perform a mitzvah with kavana. But you are yotze the mitzvah even without kavana. However, Tosfos says, and this is the really big step forward, that if I have a negative kavanah, I won't be performing the mitzvah. If I have an idle and blank mind, as most of us do, and I'm thinking about it, the mitzvah is performed. But if I deliberately have in mind that I'm not going to be yotze the mitzvah for whatever reason, then I haven't performed. Nothing can stand in the way of negative kavanah in terms of failure to perform the mitzvah. So here's option number 3. I pick everything up the right way around. Are you going to tell me the moment I pick it up, I'm yotze the mitzvah? No. Under option 3, you say to yourself, just before you pick up everything the right way around, lulav and esrog the right way around, in my picking up now, I do not wish to be yotze the mitzvah. In a moment, I will make my bracha. Before I'm yotze the mitzvah, the moment I finish my bracha, abracadabra, my intention, I wish to change, and I wish then to be yotze the mitzvah. I wish that mitzvah only to come into force for me when I've made the bracha. So he makes a, if you like, a temporal deferment of his kavanah. He defers his kavanah to be yotze till it, but he has to have a very definite state of mind. But if he has that negative state of mind, he can pick it up the right way around. And that's mutter b'halacha. Even though ArtScroll may not say so, I know what they do, they don't in the Siddur, but you can do it that way. Tosfos has given us 3 options. One option is one option is just to pick up one with the other. The other, the S3 doesn't pick up. The other one is to pick it up, one of them species the wrong way around. And the third is to have negative kavanah. And in all those cases, he can make a bracha and his mitzvah doesn't count until after the bracha. Now, just interesting, this negative kavanah, just stop sharing for a moment. We do have other instances of negative kavanah as well, or of kavanah. It's interesting that when it comes to Pesach, Erev Pesach, and we do b'dikas chometz, the Gemara actually says that min haTorah, when it comes to b'dika and bittul, bedika and biochometz, they're not strictly speaking necessary. All you need to do is bittul the lave. Bittul means annulment. When we say kol chamira v'chamia deika b'shosi techamiti v'lo chamiti abiate delo biate leheve ka'afra da'ara. That statement we make something similar before we do the searching. We make another one after we burnt. That's a statement of bittul. We nullify the chometz. Even if there's chometz left, we say, I have nothing to do with it. It's not my possession anymore. Even if it exists, it's not mine. And therefore, in theory, if you've done bittul and there's a slice of bread on the carpet during Pesach, in theory, minat Torah, you're not over any avera at all. It's in your rishus. Surely you're not allowed to have any comments in your rishus. The answer is, if you've done bittul, it isn't in your rishus. You may visibly see it there, but it belongs to someone in another galaxy. It's not yours, and you can have somebody else's chometz there. There's a real risk you might come and eat it, which is why you shouldn't allow it to be there. And if you eat chometz, then you transgress the eating of chometz, whether or not it belongs to you. But just merely having it there works simply by bittul. The act of bittul works. It's not yours anymore. However, the Rishonim say one shouldn't rely on bittul. Why? Because bittul is a mental process. It really means I have to rely on my brain acting in the right way. Our hands work better than our minds sometimes. We have idle minds very often. So if I were to merely say, you know what, I'm going to rely only on bittul next year, and I say lehafrik, I say this formula, do I really have the right thoughts? I may even recite the words. It's very dangerous, because when you rely on a state of mind rather than an action, that state of mind that we have, we're very fragile when it comes to our thinking processes. We can't always rely on them. And therefore, the bittul may not have been said with what we say, a leiv sholem, a full heart. And therefore, we shouldn't use that message. We do say it. It's belt and braces. It's in the Haggadah and the Siddur. But in fact, we do rely on biur, burning. We rely on bedika, making sure it's not there, etc., etc. We pull out all the stops to make sure that there's no chometz. We don't rely on the vagary of the human mind. Over here as well, they say, if I were to rely on my state of mind of deliberately having a negative kavanah, I say to myself, you know what, I'm not going to do what Art Scroll says and take it the wrong way around. I take everything the wrong way around, but as I pick it up, I'm going to say to myself, I'm not going to be yotze. Maybe something will distract me, and I won't say it. The moment I pick it up and I haven't said it yet, there's a question of whether I need to say it aloud, by the way, or whether it's enough for me just to have it in mind. Or if I don't have a proper mind when I say it, and I'm just reciting the word, I just say to myself when I'm thinking of something else, then in fact, I haven't had the proper negative kavanah. Yeah, we can't trust our thought processes very far. You can trust your actions better than you can trust your thought process. And therefore, the tradition has been to take it the wrong way around. Okay, so that takes us through that process, which is really quite a fundamental process.
I have a question. Is it from Tosfos that do we get it from there that we turn the Esrog around?
It's from Tosfos. It's one of Tosfos's 3 suggestions, and
yes, but is that? I mean, I know we all do that, but is it from Tosfos?
I think it's from Tosfos.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't think it's a recommendation actually in the Gemara.
I never.
The Gemara talks about all the problems about picking it up and not picking it up, etc. But okay.
Yes, I was going to say, it's not about doing the bracha on the lulav, but it's very similar. I read somewhere, and I'd never seen it before, and it's I've got thinking about it. Prior to going to the doing the bracha, you go in the sukkah next. If there's synagogues with a sukkah next to them, you go in the sukkah. This is very admirable. You say the bracha, and then you can have something to eat, and then you go in to say the Amidah and the Hallel. So you've done like going into the Sah prior to you're doing another mitzvah as well.
Yeah, so that's just recommending timing. That's a recommended timing. There are 2 different minhagim. There are those people who make it in the morning before they go to shul, and there are those who want to say it just before Hallel. If there's a sukkah, it's even better, as you say, to combine the two mitzvot.
And then they can eat. So in other words, you don't say the bracha of the lulav until you've eaten.
Okay, all right. I mean, there's some people, that's how makpid you are on that.
Right.
There's some people don't want to eat anything even before they've davened shacharis anyway. There are all sorts of minhagim on that. So I wouldn't make. I'd say I don't think it's a tola so much on that. I think it's more of a question of whether you feel it's your family custom to wait to actually bench just before Hallel, or whether it's your family custom actually do so even before you go to shul. So it does depend. Okay, so we're going to start the next Mishnah. Next Mishnah actually is in a sense, it's quite relevant, but it's quite a surprising topic that the Mishnah picks up. It's to do with a lulav, but in a very unusual context. So let's start the Mishnah and try and work out what it means. It's a very short Mishnah. Don't be confused by short Mishnahs. It's one line long, because they can sometimes be more troublesome than the long Mishnahs. Halokeach lulav mechavero bashvis. Someone. So this starts from the Mishnah, as I said, Masni, what you see over here, 2/3 of the way down the Omid. Halokeach lulav mechavero. Someone who buys a lulav from his fellow man. And Rashi says, and I think it's reasonable from the context, the way the Gemara argues later on, we're talking about buying the lulav from someone who you don't know how reliable he is. Rashi calls him an Am Ha'aretz. And Am Ha'aretz has got so many different connotations that, almost difficult to know which one we're referring to over here, but not necessarily someone who is reliable when it comes to all the mitzvahs. We're not talking about a goy. We're just talking about someone who may not be entirely reliable. Bashvius on the Shemitah year. So this is a complication. And it'll be the complication of Shemitah, which is going to bother us over here, rather than the fact that it is a lulav, if you like, rather than something else. No saying lo esrog b'matana. He should get the seller to give him the esrog as a gift. Lefi she'ein reshoy lelokcho bashvis. Because the person buying shouldn't buy it from him on the Shemitah year. What on earth is going on over here? First of all, there's a giant. Let's just get around the very, very big complication before you find it complicates it. There is an implication in the Mishnah that we have a problem of Shemitah trading of some sort on the esrog, but not on the lulav. The Gemara is going to later on challenge it and say, why isn't the same problem from the lulav? But for the moment, just assume that the esrog is subject to Shemitah regulations and Kedushas Shemitah, Kedusha Shvius. This doesn't belong to a goy. It's a real holy Kedusha Shemitah esrog he wants to get. So he goes to this person who is selling him a lulav and esrog. So the Mishnah says he's got to be very careful that this is the Shvius, the Shemitah year, because he should not buy the esrog of the person selling it to him. We'll see why later on. But I mean, just for the moment, just understand that trading in Shemitah goods is not allowed. Trading in Shemitah goods is not allowed. There are exceptions, but trading in Shemitah goods is not allowed. So therefore, he has a problem. As far as the lulav, it seems the Mishnah doesn't believe there was a problem. Let him pay full whack for the lulav. However, he wants the esrog, which is on the table as well. So he should say to the seller, look, I'm buying the lulav off you. Can you, for the amount you wanted, it says 50 shekels, and I'm paying you 50 shekels for the lulav. Could you possibly throw in the esrog for nothing? Matana. He doesn't say for a discount. He says for nothing. That's what he should persuade the seller to do. So that way he is not buying an esrog from that man and paying cash for an esrog. He's getting it as a gift. Why? Because he should not be buying this esrog on the Shvius. That's what the Mishnah says. So any questions, it said that some of those questions you may have in your head will be dealt with in the Gemara, no doubt. But this is the simple statement over here. The implication seems to be at this point, which I find very surprising. The Rishonim actually picked this up. The implication seems to be that at the time, the esrog was worth less money than a lulav. And it would not be unreasonable to ask a person sending you a lulav whether they could throw in the esrog for nothing, right? You could say to the person, look, I'm paying you full price for the lulav, and the lulav is, I know, an expensive commodity. The esrog is relatively cheap. Anyway, couldn't you throw that in? And if he agrees, all well and good. If he doesn't agree, he might not be able to buy his lulav and esrog this year. Okay, that's the implication of the Mishnah. So now let's look at the Gemara. The Gemara says over here, a very simple Balabatisha question, which you might find also quite surprising in terms of the instruction of the Mishnah. Lo rotza litain lo b'matana mahu. Supposing the seller doesn't want to give it to him free. Isn't that big? You don't have your Talmud Chacham. If you're going to someone who's trying to sell you a lulav and esrog and he's charging you a price for the lulav, not for the set, but for the lulav, how can you expect every one of all these sellers to cave in and say you can have the esrog for nothing? Of course, he could be charging you a ridiculous price for the lulav. For the moment, let's not assume he is, because we'll come to that in a moment. Yes, he's got a price on the lulav, 80 shekels. He's got a price on the esrog, 10 shekels. You say, I want to buy the lulav 80, but give me the esrog free. That's what the Mishnah is telling you to do. So says the Gemara, supposing the guy isn't so compliant and the seller doesn't want to give you the esrog for free, what are you to do? Well, your answer might be just walk on and try and find somebody else who's more charitable. But the Gemara, no. The Gemara is going to give you an eitzah number 2 here. Amar Rav Huna, mavliya leidemei esrog v'lulav. This seems like a fairly obvious compromise. This is one of the tricks of the trade that we see in halacha sometimes, which means mavliya le, which means you swallow up demei esrog, the cost of the esrog in the lulav. You are allowed to pay him an inflated price for the lulav, knowing that the esrog will be thrown in. Now, this is something that is not so far away from other activities we do as well. And there's a machlokas on exactly what this means, but it works best in the situation where the esrog isn't separately denominated by price, right? So you've got someone who's selling you a lulav, and really you know that lulav is only worth 80, and you know the esrog is worth 10. So for the set you should be paying 90. So you say to the seller, can I pay you 90 for the lulav? And he throws in the esrog. It's the same end result as paying 80 and 10, but there was no explicit price put on the esrog. Now there is a question as to how explicit or implicit all this can be. We all know there's a bit of smoke and mirrors in all this. The guy wants to make his money, and he knows that the only way he can do this. So in the end, all these people will be just charging a bit more for the lulav and throwing in the esrog. But the Gemara says that's fine. That's called mavliya or bahavlah. And where have you seen this before? Half the world does this. Nearly everyone here on this call will have done this many times before. It's done either by you or by someone indirectly on behalf of you when it comes to making a big Shabbos dinner or something, or employing a maid to do the washing up on a Seder night or something, right? In theory, what happens, you're paying your workers a price for the week. You know that a lot of their work will be on the Shabbos, but you're paying them for the weekday, and you are swallowing in, or they are swallowing, if you like, what they receive. They swallow up also the work they do for you on Shabbos. And because you're not you shouldn't explicitly make a trade to employ them for Shabbos. You shouldn't pay someone just for Shabbos. You should really do it in such a way that there is some weekday work involved. And then what they do is bahavlah. Even though they are charging essentially for the time on Shabbos, it's all bahavlah. Even a rabbi and a chazan, in a sense, are being paid bahavlah. A chazan does most of his singing on Shabbos. Forget the fact that he's not doing the malacha. You're paying him for Shabbos. What a chutzpah. I wish I could be paid for my Shabbos work. How can you pay a chazan for Shabbos? The answer is that on a Friday he's gargling, isn't he, with his eggs. And on a Thursday he's practicing with a choir. And on Wednesday he's thinking of a new tune. So, okay, in fact, all of his manifest efforts come out in Shabbos, but it's B'Havlah. Almost everything works that way. We do a lot of tricks that way. So over here, the suggestion is that you swallow up, or he agrees to swallow up, the price of the esrog in the lulav, and everything works fine. So if he doesn't give it to you free, then he gives it to you at a price which implicitly includes the price for the esrog. That's B'Havlah. Okay. So now the Gemara says, B'leisav lei b'hedya. What is wrong in actually explicitly giving him the money for the esrog? Well, I'm coming back to first principles. So I explained to you before it was wrong. You can't do trade. But it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as that. The Gemara understands over here that if you're not doing trade in a trade way, but on a small scale way, and someone has taken, let's say the seller has got his esrog and the lulav, and he's not trading hundreds of them and thousands of them and picking them off some big field, but he had one in his back garden, or he had his own little orchard, mini orchard, then he's allowed to take a few for himself. He's allowed to sell you his esrog and his lulav. Why can't you then, that sort of small scale trading where one-to-one relationship is not also on the Shemitah? So the Gemara is saying, well, let's assume that the transaction is small scale. You're only buying a single lulav and esrog from him. What is so wrong for you explicitly paying him 80 shekels for the lulav and 10 for the esrog, not B'Havlah, no tricks, literally paying him separately for both items, given that this is a person-to-person transaction and not part of a trading relationship? There's no large-scale trade involved. Small-scale trading is okay. If you've got a back garden, you're growing apples, and you've taken in your 20 apples, and you've got a couple of spare apples, you can actually sell your apples to someone else because you are not a trader. That's not the way you normally do trade. So similarly, this guy who's selling you, as long as he's selling you on a small scale, this thing sounds okay, doesn't it? Why can't you pay explicitly? Why do you either have to ask him to donate to you the esrog or do it through this system of Havlah, swallowing up the price and the price of a lulav? Why do you have to use these smoke and mirrors methods? So the Gemara explains why. Lefi she'ein mosrin demei perish v'yis la'am ha'aretz. Interesting notion over here. Do you know what? In fact, buying that esrog from him on a one-to-one, that isn't really what is worrying the Mishnah over here when it says you shouldn't do this directly and pay explicitly your 10 shekels for the esrog. That wasn't the problem. The problem is when you pay him the money, if it's explicit for the esrog, when you pay him the money, he's taking the 10 shekels you give him for the esrog. You have got an esrog, which is true. You've bought that esrog fair and square on a retail basis, on a one-to-one personal transaction. That's not a bad thing, but excuse me a moment. There is something very problematic about selling something to someone which has kedusha shvius on it. It has a sting in the tail. It's a sting in the tail when you buy, by the way, oats are based in fruit, which you might well do in this coming shvius. And that is that when you actually pay someone for something, the money you pay over to someone for something that has kedusha shvius on it as well. It actually, the demei paris, the money you pay over, it doesn't look like a fruit. It may not look like esrog, but it has kedusha shvius, which means that the person who takes it from you can only do certain things with it. And there's a din of biur. I mean, eventually may have to make it hefko, when all the food is gone from the field, all sorts of the strange rules of kedusha shvius. He can't use it to pay tiddlywinks with or to rail along the floor. The coin now has some sort of kedusha. He might be able to use it for something else, but he can't use it for anything he wants to. It actually has a transfer of kedusha shvius on it. That's demei shvius, the money taken in exchange for shvius. You've got the shvius lulav. He has now got the money of the shvius, and he has got kedusha on that. And if you knew he wasn't an amoritz, then you could do it 1-to-1 because you could trust him. But this is an amoritz. You just bought this from someone, you don't know what he's going to do with the money. He may use this to put towards buying a giant, a refinery or something, or giant fruit farm, which is going to, wholesale trade with the chutzlaretz. You don't know what he's going to do with this money. And therefore, you shouldn't pay him the money. That's why the Mishnah says you need to do it as a gift, because you're not actually explicitly paying money for that esrog. And if he was a trustworthy person, you could even do it explicitly, because he would know that this money had demei kedusha shvius on it. But because he's not a trustworthy person, or rather you haven't established his credentials as an amoritz, you don't really know, therefore you shouldn't pay explicitly. And therefore, the only methods you can actually obtain your esrog are either by getting it as a gift, or by getting it as or by havalah, by swallowing it up, so to speak, in the cost of the lulav. So there is no explicit sale of the esrog to you. And the Gemara is going to bring a brisa to prove that is the fact, that you shouldn't give over money of shvius to an amhoritz. Just parenthetically now, when it comes to shvius, sometimes it's the year after which is the problem, not the year during, because you're getting the stuff which was picked before shvius anyway. So, it's not this year, may not be the real problem, maybe the year following. You might find that they're trading either otze based in esrogim, which the based in, so to speak, markets and bypasses, if it's from Eretz Yisrael, the halachas of marketing. And you're buying it off the basin, and the basin can't, and the basin has certain rules about only getting overheads and not making profits, etc., etc. When you buy it, then that esrog will have kedusha shvius, and then you have to be very careful not to let it, to make sure that it isn't abused, so to speak, and you can only use it in certain ways. That will be a Eretz Yisrael esrog which has kedusha shvius, and it's otze basin. It can be sold to you, but you have to be very careful. But if there's no amhoritz at the other side of the deal over here, so you don't have a problem, or you make sure that the esrog you buy, if it isn't otze basin, it's more likely to be mechutzlaretz. Otherwise, you're most likely to have it otze basin. I'm not sure whether they do heter mechira. I don't even remember heter mechira esrogim, because in theory that would be all right. If you hold of heter mechira, that would be all right as well. Again, here the Gemara has no notion of heter mechira over here. If it has kedusha shvius, it is frontline kedusha shvius, and you can't give the money over in return for the esrog if it has kedusha shvius. That's the way the Gemara understands it over here. As I said, the next piece, the Gemara is going to bring a proof that there is a risk if you hand over money and do any trade with someone you don't know what he's doing with the money for kedusha shvius. Even if you've bought it fairly and you're going to treat it well, the money goes over to him. You don't know how he's going to spend the money, and that will be a problem. But you can unmute yourself, please do. We'll stop recording. Where is my recording? Oh. How do I stop? 1 second.